Dear student, in last video we discussed structure of ovule and megasporogenesis, that is development of female gametophyte. Today we will discuss pollination and types of pollination. So let's start. First point, that is pollination. Pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of the flower. In angiosperm, both male and female gametes are non-motile, as these gametes are produced at two different sites. Means male gamete produced from pollen grain and female gamete produced from ovule. As there are, so you can see this image, that is pollen grain, it's deposited on the stigma of same flower or another flower, that is called pollination. The pollination, it is of two type of pollination. First one, self-pollination. Second one, cross-pollination. Self-pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grain from anther to the receptive stigma of a single flower or two flowers on the same plant. It results in breeding or selfing. You can see here the transfer of pollen grain from anther to the receptive stigma, that is called self-pollination. So there is no variations occurred in self-pollination. Second type of pollination, that is called cross-pollination. It is the transfer of pollen grain from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of different plant of a same species. Means species is similar but the flowers are two. Means in cross-pollination there are involves the two flowers. The transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of another flower of different plant of same species, that is called cross-pollination or cross-breeding. So in case of cross-pollination there is variations occur. The pollination can be further divided it into three types on the basis of pollination. As we see, there are the two types of pollination, self-pollination and the cross-pollination. Self-pollination, it is again divided to, first one is autogamy, second one it's a XENOGAMY. The cross-pollination is also called XENOGAMY or ALLOGAMY. In autogamy, there is involves single flower. In XENOGAMY, there is involves the two flowers but the same plant. And in ALLOGAMY or XENOGAMY, there is involves the different plant of a same species. So let's start the further part, that is the first one, it's a autogamy. This autogamy, it is also called as self-pollination. It is type of pollination in which bisexual flower is pollinated by its own pollen grain. You can see in this image the pollen grain which is come from the anther and it's being deposited on the stigma of a same flower. So the new individual, that is the offspring which is formed, it is genetically identical to their parents, that is called autogamy. Second type, it's a XENOGAMY. This XENOGAMY, it is the transfer of pollen grain to the stigma of a different flower produced on the same plant. It is functionally similar to the cross-pollination. because there is involves the two flower, but both these flower it's a develop on the same plant. So for the transfer of pollen grain from anther to the receptive stigma, there is involves the pollinating agent, but it cannot bring the genetical variations. It is only of the ecological significance. This gytenogamy it is observed in cucurbita and maize plant. This gytenogamy it is similar to the autogamy, as the pollen grain come from the same plant. Here there is involves only one plant, but there is involves the pollinating agent. This gytenogamy it's not possible in dioecious plant. The third type we see, that is the XENOGAMY. It's a cross-pollination or allogamy. It is also called the outbreeding. It is a type of cross-pollination when the pollen grain of one flower is deposited on the stigma of a flower of different plant. Means here there is involves the two plant, but these two plant belonging to same species. Means here there is involves the pollinating agent. So we again see it's a type of cross-pollination when pollen grain of one flower is deposited on the stigma of a flower of different plant belonging to same species with the help of pollinating agency. It's generate dissimilar offsprings because there is involves the different plants. Different plants is involved, so the offspring newly developed individual it's not genetically similar to the parental one. Means there is variations is observed. All seed plants needs the pollination. It's a example, it's a cannabis, date palm, cycas, onion and spinach. Next one, we have to concentrate those points we study, that is the types of pollination. It's a self-pollination and cross-pollination. So let's start the difference present between the self and cross-pollination. The first one, it is the transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of either the same or different flower present on same plant, that called self-pollination. Cross-pollination, it is transfer of pollen grain from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower of different plant. In self-pollination, only one plant is involved, but in cross-pollination, the two plants are involved. In self-pollination, both anther and the stigma mature at same time, but in cross-pollination, anther and stigma mature at different time. In self-pollination, external pollinating agents are not required because there is involves the single plant. In case of cross-pollination, there is involves the external pollinating agents. It is economical for the plant. It is highly wasteful method. In self-pollination, no wastage of pollen grain. In cross-pollination, more wastage of pollen grain. In self-pollination, there is no wastage of energy. In cross-pollination, as there is requires a pollinating agent, so there is a more wastage of energy. In self-pollination, produce the pure line variety, but in cross-pollination, the two plants are involved, so it is the variations are present in the offsprings and the parental plant. Useful characteristics are maintained. The useful character can be diluted or it may be eliminated. There is an absence of variability, but in case of the cross-pollination there is the presence of variability. Here we completed the pollination and types of pollination, difference between self and cross-pollination. Thanks for watching my video. We will continue further part in the next video. Thank you.